So good evening, seniors, friends, past presidents of the society, my office bearers, Abhay, Mihir, and Chirag. I welcome all of you to this lecture meeting, come panel discussion on a very live, relevant, and I will not only say hot, but it is super hot topic by the eminent panelists. I welcome the panelists, Advocate Nitish Desai and his partner, his team, and thank them for accepting our invitation. Special thanks to the moderator, Mr. Ninad Karpe, our core group member and technology expert for accepting to moderate this session at 48-hour notice. I thank past presidents of the society, Ketan Shah and Naushad Panjwani, who helped us immensely to finalize the subject and get these faculties on board. In the words of our moderator Ninadji, when we were speaking yesterday, they are the trump cards. But Ninadji, you will agree with me that BCS is a large trump card, a brand BCS umbrella, which we are all components of it, of this larger trump card. And you are a part of BCS much before we became a part of it. So you know it better. More than a year or so, this BCS umbrella, BCS trump card adapted itself to a digital transformation and the virtual realities. BCS brand image and digital is a very strong combination to get the best faculties with ease and their comfort. Throughout the year, we did it. Today's session is an example once again. Similarly, on 6th of July, which is the founding day of BCS, at 6 p.m., this is the 73rd founding day, Mr. Azim Premji, an industry leader and a philanthropist, is a guest speaker on BCS virtual platform, and he's going to speak on professional excellence and social responsibility. Please join us to hear him live, naturally virtually. Link is there on the BCS website, www.bcsonline.org. Digital currency, a cryptocurrency, is the talk of today and hopefully the future of tomorrow. There is so much of activity currently in this domain, globally, locally, central banks, tax authorities, eminent class of people making a tweet, so much of volatility. We know banking has already and substantially become digital, and now even hard cash and coins is also becoming digital. As we know, Nishit Desai and Associates is an early entrant in this domain and has a legal and practical exposure on the subject. When we thought of the subject and lecture meeting thereon, we could think of his firm as first choice, and they were absolutely graceful and kind to accept it immediately. Thank you so much. And Nishit Bhai and team, it is our pleasure and proud privilege that we end the innings of this managing committee. I mean the technical topics of lecture meeting with your last word on the most sought after topic. We thank you for the same. I thank all the participants for their response throughout the year, for their love and affection towards BCS. And with this brief background, may I request Treasurer Chirag Doshi to formally introduce all the faculties. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suhas Bhai. It's an honor to introduce today's faculties and moderators. We today have battalion of lawyers out here. We start with Nishit Bhai. Nishit Bhai, who is known as the father of international tax in India, and he's a true pioneer in the field of international tax law. He is co-founder of office firm Nishit Desai and Associate, which is ranked amongst the India's most Asia Pacific's most innovative law firm by Financial Times. He has been pioneered in establishing the first 5 Indian-focused firms. His firm currently also has worked for more than 1,400 funds across all asset classes. When it comes to technology, Nishit Bhai ensured that his firm remains ahead of the technology curve, driving legal and ethical research into emerging areas such as blockchain, autonomous vehicles, flying cars, IoT, AI, robotics, medical devices, genetic engineering, amongst others. Even in terms of when it comes to research, they have an excellently conceptualized and created Imaginarium Ali Gunjan, a state-of-art research facility that stands different. It's very near to Mumbai. Uh, Nishit Bhai himself is also passionate about supporting social good and has been always ahead. His firm has also won the Asian Law Firm of the Year for pro bono services. And they are also the founding member of Impact Investment Council in India, and he's worked with Nobel literate Professor Yunus on social issues and personally received the Professor Mohammad Yusuf Social Business Pioneer of India in 2010. We welcome you, Nishit Bhai, for the BCS forum. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Along with Nishit Bhai, we have other lawyers. Start with Vaibhav Parekh. He is leader of technology and PE and M&A practice, and he also leads the US practice for the firm. Mr. Mayappan, who is leader of international tax practice, specifically the digital taxation piece for the firm. Suril Desai, who also happens to be Nishit Bhai's son, is and Purushottam Kittane are member of the blockchain and cryptocurrency practice of the firm. They are the one who have led the practice of the firm ahead. So with this, I welcome the entire team of Nishit Desai and Associates. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And to introduce our today's moderator, Mr. Ninad Karpe. Ninad ji is a partner at 100x VC. We all know a firm which is in talks today. They invest in early stage startup and aims to invest in almost 100 startups per year. Karpeji was the MD and CEO of Eptech. For 7 years, he previously served CA Technologies, a US headquarter leader in software product. He was managing director of India for them almost for 13 years. He has authored 5 books on taxation and investment in India. He is also a frequent writer and speaker on business strategy, and his 20 minutes live web broadcast with reputed personalities are, which the audience always look forward to. He's also recently authored a book on business strategy titled Born to Baba, which received again a rave reviews and was listed on Amazon in prestigious book of memorable of 2018. He is also chairman, he was chairman of Western region of CII for 2017-18. He loves theater and has also produced 2 Marathi plays which has received wide acclaim. And it's we are lucky today there is no F1 racing today, otherwise he generally switches off his mobile phone and is not available on those days. So we welcome you, Ninad ji, on our BCS forum. We welcome all of you, and over to you, Nishit bhai.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Suhas, my friend Naushad, Chirag Doshi, Nishit, my old friend Nishit, Suril, Vaibhav, when I was approached, just as Suhas mentioned 48 hours back, to moderate the session, when I saw Nishit Desai, there was really no choice. Why 48 hours? I'm ready to do anything for Nishit within 4 minutes, no, not 48 hours. He knows that we have a long-standing friendship, and I'm so delighted that he's going to share a knowledge on such a topical matter. And not only him, he's got his entire firm. This is true commitment to sharing knowledge with chartered accountants, sharing knowledge with people. He has been a pioneer. I've known him for a long time. And this is a topic which everyone wants to know something about it. There's intrigue surrounding it. There is some bit of mystery surrounding it. And hopefully by 7:45, when we aim to stop this, Nishit and his team will throw some light. The entire genesis of cryptocurrency, and the topic today is cryptocurrency, the future of money, is blockchain technology. Blockchain technology had a paradigm shift in the way we looked at how we use technology, and cryptocurrency evolved from there. it has evolved so much that everyone started taking notice. Just as an example, Bitcoin is the market cap is more than $1 trillion. Central bank authorities started taking note of it. They are also wanting to have their own version of digital coin, or what they call CBDC, central bank digital currency. We are going to see a lot more of this happening. How important is this, and how many transactions happen in India? I was staggered to see the volumes. I read today from IAMAI, which is Internet and Mobile Association of India, that they have estimated that there are 15 million crypto investors in India, 15 million, and with a daily trading volume of 350 million to 500 million US dollars. It may be small compared to the daily equity investment happening, but it is significant. It is something we should take note about it. And what is the whole cryptocurrency about? Is cryptocurrency the future of money? Over to you, Nishit and Steve.
So first of all, thank you very much for the generous comments that you have made, and making me larger than life. I still continue to be, an ordinary lawyer. And Ninad, our relationship goes back almost 3 generations, I think, three decades. And I said 30 years makes a generation. I've seen you also, how well you have grown and done wonderful thing. And with Sanjay Mehta, you've done such a fantastic job, and I think people should know more about your thing, what you're doing, and how you've been successfully investing. And I would also love to learn from that. Today's session, I thought it will be more of a sharing session. I'm not teaching, I'm not just trying to preach or otherwise, but I think the exchange of ideas are very important. So let me just step back for a moment and tell you how we got into the space, and how we work around, So essentially, I think the screen has gone off, but essentially, as a law firm, when I started law firm, there were 100-year law firms, 200-year law firm, and stuff like that. So how do I go about it? And they could look back with pride, 100 years, and rightly so, to survive 100 years, not easy. But I'm new kid on the block, solo. I was a counsel. Today also, at times going to the court now because my international travel is gone down. But at that point of time, I started looking at it and I thought, okay, if these law firms can look back 100 years, and rightly so, as I mentioned, they can take pride in that, but I don't have history. So maybe I should look 100 years in the future and then try to build a practice. I'm complementary to other law firms, and we work in a collaborative manner. That was the whole thought process. So some value add and stuff like that. And I have always been a researcher. My interest has always been on, learning things and stuff like that. Even today, we spend almost 40% of our time, firm's time, on research, academics, thought leadership, and stuff like that, and share that in public domain. So we call ourselves sometimes open source law firm as well, The fun of sharing is so much. We are in the profession of business, not so much in the business per se, And so the philosophy came up that every new technology, every new business model, every new social, political, or economic development brings along with it a new strategic, legal, tax, or ethical issues. So the way in which the whole practice was built was on the principle of what is called anticipate, prepare, and deliver. Okay. So started looking at different things and, different trends and forecasting and stuff like that. So trend assessment, forecasting, slowly started doing. And when I started law firm, I'm solo, new kid on the block, big firms around, so nobody would join me. Okay. So there was one kid who came, he was the electronics engineer, and a first class electronics engineer, applied for going to the US for further studies. And then visa was denied. He was very disappointed with technical schools in the US. He was aspiring to go. But anyway, cutting the whole story short, so I said, Nishit bhai, can you help me to get immigration cleared? I said, I'm not immigration lawyer, but he thought I'm a lawyer, so I have to do everything. Then he said, what do I do now? So I said, become a lawyer. Okay. So from electronics engineering, he became a lawyer and joined me, after 3 years. And of course, in the meanwhile, while he was studying, he was repairing computers and uh, printers and all those kind of thing and stuff like that. Anyway, but he brought a lot of technology culture into the firm. And his name is Vaibhav Parekh. So we are working for last 30 years. He's going to be giving you some presentation in a while on. So welcome, Vaibhav. I think thanks to you, we are where we are today. And it's almost 30 years we have been working together, and it's the amazing job. So he led Bangalore office and then to Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and then came back and then again went back. So he's leading our New York office, and he's going to be sharing. So he became a technology lawyer and then became most prominent PE M&A lawyer, because most of the activities are in that space. So you're going to listen from him as well. But cutting again, whole story short, the approach was anticipate, prepare, and deliver. So you look to the future, what new technologies will come, what will be legal, tax, and ethical issues that will be coming up, right? And in the process, write papers and analyze the situation. And that is how we started looking at different technologies. Of course, those days it was slightly different than what it is what has been last 20 years. So we look at a lot of these technologies, which some of them were mentioned. That, for example, even this blockchain and Bitcoin thing, right? It was in 2012. My son Suril Desai, he came and said, "Okay, we should look at Bitcoins." And I said, "I don't want to even touch that, because what all that I heard was Silk Route and terrorism and the gun financing and all this kind of stuff." And I said, but anyway, you can't deny when young kids come and talk to you something. So I started studying, and we started doing research and prepared a lot of work. We thought that even if it comes, it will take 8-10 years, by the time this will pick up as it is happening today. But in 2012, it was completely, and nobody wanted to talk about it. But what happened in 2013, enforcement department raided the Bitcoin traders. Okay, whole industry came to a standstill. But we could give opinion within 1 hour to say that Bitcoins are not illegal per se. Okay, and then one way to resolve the issue was to go to government and that this is not illegal. It is not falling in the definition of money. It is not currency. It is not foreign exchange. It is not um, other kind of security and stuff, whatever. So we had analyzed everything. So within 1 hour we could go give opinion. What we thought it will take 10 years actually became relevant within just 1 year. At that point of time, when industry told us that, okay, can we go and make a representation to government? I said, if you go to government, what will they do? They will appoint a committee. And once you have gone and asked for a committee, you won't get result for 1 year, 2 years, you don't know. So in the meanwhile, best thing is to take the whole thing head on, and we convene a press conference and explained a lot of press, 40 press people had come, and we explained that this is not illegal, and although it is not illegal, we as an industry suggest people should not invest in this until such time you are able to suffer loss and write off. It's a very high risk area. So as industry, even though there are no regulations, we always have an obligation to the society to disclose and decide people that only if you can lose. Even today, we always tell that if you can write off, then invest, otherwise don't. At that point of time, it was very, very cheap. Bitcoin was maybe less than $100. I don't remember that. We had a conference in Delhi, on sovereignty and other kind of stuff. And in fact, we gave away small Satoshi free of charge to every participant. And they have become about 50,000 rupees worth, small Satoshis today, And so the thing is that it became relevant in 2013. And then press notes came out and press came out, with a statement. And then enforcement department called Nishit bhai, ye Bitcoin kya cheez hai, So they had raided something without understanding what it was like. And then we explained, and then the whole thing got closed and everything worked out. After a few years, some people played a Ponzi scheme. Okay. And that's where the Reserve Bank also woke up. And obviously, Reserve Bank has some responsibility to the public, and but it has no power to regulate Bitcoins or cryptocurrency. And that is how a ban was imposed, and they could not stop traders. They could not stop mining, they could not stop trading and all those kind of thing. All that they could do, they had control over the banks. So they asked all the banks to stop accepting the accounts of the Bitcoin or say crypto or virtual currency traders. And that is how the whole ban came up in 2018, I think 5th of April, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. And then eventually, what has happened, so we challenged the ban. We went to Supreme Court, and first of all, writ petitions were filed in different high courts as well. So ultimately, we went to Supreme Court, and all the high courts were directed that Supreme Court will hear. It was a very important case. And then it went on for some time, and I do not know if you all have seen the judgment, but it's beautifully written, 180 pages judgment. And Supreme Court said that ban on this virtual currency, or say blanket ban on the people who are operating the account with the banks who do legitimate work, is disproportionate to the fears, or disproportionate interference in the restriction on trade and profession and stuff like that. So Supreme Court has held that it is not illegal, first of all, and number two, Reserve Bank cannot ban it. At the most, it can regulate. In the meanwhile, we had already prepared self-regulatory framework. Some of you who want to read that, maybe on our website, you can go through, or we can send you. So self-regulations also have been, we are prepared for everything to show our bona fides that here we are not here to cheat people, but here we are to help people, because this is the future in many ways. In many countries, the status of virtual currency is not very clear. Somewhere it is treated as currency, somewhere it is considered as security. But more than the countries which consider this to be a currency, they consider them as security. So it's a security law that is being applied. And of course, then there were variations to the whole security, the security tokens, and other kind of things that come up now. NFT is coming up. We can talk about it later on. And so this is how the history has gone in, and great thing. And I would also say I'm happy about the fact that it was not a senior lawyer whom we engaged. Of course, I appeared with Ashim Sood. He was a junior lawyer with Soli Sorabji in the Mauritius treaty case, Azadi Bachao on the London Supreme Court. So I was there. He was junior, and we told him, Ashim, why don't you argue? So we did not go to senior lawyer. So my pride is that to give opportunity to young people, and he brilliantly argued the case. Okay, and Supreme Court judges have also talked about him, the kind of work he has done. And I would just tell you that before drawing curtains down, Supreme Court's language, we are bound to record in every artistic display our appreciation for skillful manner in which Ashim Sood Learned Counsel led the attack on the impugned circular, but for which the climax could not have had. 180 pages Supreme Court judgment. I think it will be very interesting for all of you to read that. So brilliantly written. And the interesting thing was that when we started, obviously there were negative impressions, because when it comes to crypto, first thing comes to terrorism, drug financing, guns, and stuff like that. But we have to turn that perception into positive, and then argue on technical points. And eventually, Supreme Court did a good justice. And so it said that to ban will be disproportionate remedy, and therefore they cannot ban, but they can regulate that. And that's where I learned for a moment. But this is little history. I went on too long, I don't know. But this may give you a little perspective as to how research actually helps, and I think all of you can work on that. And some of you are already doing that, I know. But this is one approach in our profession is very, very important. And, So this technology is going to be very helpful as we move along, and we'll talk about it later on. But I'll stop here for a minute. I'll request my son, who really helped me to pioneer this space, for a few minutes, and so.
Thanks, Nishit. Before Suril start, just 10 seconds. Participant attendees, if you have any questions, please start posting in the Q&A section. After Nishit and his team is done, we'll take it up. So please start posting questions. We'll take it later. Go ahead, Suril. Look forward to your talk.
Sure. So, I mean, I can see one of the question is that what is the court citation for the Supreme Court? So it's writ petition civil number 528 of 2018. So if anyone wants to have a look at it. So let me tell you a bit about myself. I am a lawyer. I'm an artist. I'm also a documentary filmmaker. And I got involved in cryptocurrency while I was researching on privatization of space exploration. And when I came across it, I was completely fascinated. I never thought that something like this would actually come into existence and be, become such a important asset of its own kind. And when I was reading up on Bitcoins in the beginning, it was obviously first in the first few instances, it was about the illicit trades and Silk Road, and but what really fascinated me was that it boils down to one very simple concept that we all tend to forget, and that is the question of trust. Trust is the most important element in our society. It's the pinnacle of our existence, and trust has existed in various forms in our society. So initially it was the family, and the head of the family would be responsible for protection of the family. Then came, from that evolved into kingdoms where the king and the armies were responsible. And eventually we distributed this trust. So distribution of trust is what this whole crypto is based on. And if to give you a backdrop, the white paper on Bitcoin came out on October 31st, 2008. And in August 2008, the bitcoin.org domain was registered. And it was prior to the launch of the paper that we had seen the world had seen the greatest financial crisis, where we lost, two of the most prominent banks, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. And on the backdrop of this white paper comes out. So what does it really tell you? It tells you that people were upset. People were losing confidence in the centralized system of banking. People felt that they have been cheated. People felt left out. People felt that they were not taken into consideration enough. And when this white paper came out, it was instantly adopted by the community of the people which included mainly students and professors and the academicians. And then on January 3rd, 2009, is when the first block, the Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain was released. And the first message on that block was the Chancellor of Bank of England I don't remember the exact words, but that the Bank of England is on the verge of collapse. And that really spearheaded the whole, what we call the crypto revolution. It was a bunch of academics, bunch of programmers, bunch of people who had absolutely no real-time involvement in the financial markets who started really pushing for this technology. So it was this whole idea of distributed leadership, distributed trust, distribution, and blockchain as a part of this whole ecosystem became the fundamental topic of discussion. And blockchain is, in simplistic words, it's nothing but a shared distributed ledger, which is available on multiple computers with multiple nodes. Unlike a centralized system where you can have many points where there's a single point of attack and it can bring down an entire system. If you have a distributed system, it's not that easy to hack. And Bitcoins became the choice and the currency of it's in the simplest terms, Bitcoin is programmable money. And what does that mean? That its limits are set by an algorithm. And this algorithm cannot be changed by any size effort, unless 51% consensus of all the people in the Bitcoin blockchain agree to increasing the volume of Bitcoins, which is restricted to 21 million. It cannot be changed. Unlike a fiat money, which the supply can go up and down as per the whimsies of the politicians. And so this programmable money became a store of value, and its scarcity, it works on the principle of scarcity, which allows for it to be an important tool in modern day trade. And its beauty lies in its simplicity, that you can email it. It's literally like emailing, like the present day banking system is not designed for our digital economy. And I can go on and on about it, but there's a whole philosophical underpinning that people had lost trust in the existing banking system, and that's why crypto is here. Had it not been for 2008, we would not have seen such a mass adoption or mass large-scale acceptance of cryptocurrencies. And I would leave it here, because if you have any more questions, you can always email me, and because there's so much to talk about it, and it would be a talk on its own. So I would pass on the podium to Vaibhav to give you more in-depth details of the whole Bitcoin and how it works. Thank you.
Thanks, Suril. Over to Vaibhav. We already started getting a lot of questions, Vaibhav, which is a good sign. So, once you're done, both of you will start taking. So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. No, I have been reading questions. I've been reading questions, and I think there are very interesting questions. Maybe in the question and answer session, we will take all those questions which has come in. I have prepared a slide presentation. We have a slide presentation, but we will not take you through the full slide presentation. I will just spend about 10 minutes or so talking about some of those things, and but I just thought I will show you the slide presentation. So if you want, or if you have any questions later, happy to take it up, either in the Q&A session or even outside this. So let's go to the slide presentation next. Purushottam, you are controlling, right? So let's go to the next one. Can you go to the next one? Yeah. These are the contents we are covering right now. I will spend more time on Indian legal landscape. The other one, I think we will just skim through, spending just 2-3 minutes on that. And then Mayappan will spend more time on taxation of legal landscape, right? So these two are the ones which we will be focused on. Let's go next. Yeah, so this basically talks about the opportunities. So one, obviously, we talked about cryptocurrency and Bitcoins. This is something which everybody knows. It's been used, but from technology perspective, we see there is a lot of value in remittance area, and this is where where it's already being used, and that's where there is a real application which saves a lot of time and money for banks. Similarly, blockchain software development has become a big thing in India, and we are already seeing a lot of developers developing for global markets and becoming successful. So that's the other way. So it could be a next software wave from India. I mean, that's an opportunity. For example, these were the first crypto billionaires. We already have Unicorn in India. This company was valued at 14 billion. Now I don't know what is today's value, but at some point of time they were valued at 14 billion. This is the other startups which has become very popular. They actually help DeFi, which is the decentralized finance. They've come with a very interesting apps which allows people to go and do all the finances without any central regulated agency involved. Next, again, they raised more than $1 billion for Indian COVID things. For blockchain, a lot of people are involved with. So, while there was one question also earlier, which said that, can you segregate blockchain and cryptocurrency? Really speaking, when you get public blockchain, you really cannot segregate cryptocurrency, because any payment made for public blockchain is done by mining, and that generates cryptocurrency. So really you cannot segregate cryptocurrency and public blockchain. If you have a private blockchain, yes, but not really for public blockchain. And all these people, all these companies which is there on the screen are actually working on public blockchain. So in that sense, it's something which is now got mainstream attracting attention also. Next. Again, Goldman is looking at, so all major finance company are considering blockchain as future of their markets. They feel that blockchain will actually completely change the rules of how the finance industry works. So that is what the level that they are looking at it. These are the price. I will not get into it. This is how the price movement went. Just not Bitcoin, but Ethereum has been very important. Non-fungible token is the another application which has recently become very popular, and we see a lot of opportunity in this for several areas, whether it is artist, whether it is author, whether it is sports company, whether it is Bollywood or film industry. There is a lot of opportunities on NFTs, even in India, and we will see, as we see next 3 years, you will see a lot more NFTs coming in. But this again is an application of one of the blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Next. And this is a very interesting development, which was recent development. June 10th, El Salvador became first country to make Bitcoin a legal tender, which means that now Bitcoin is a legal tender in one country. So it could be considered to be a foreign currency. We are still examining it to see what is the legal implications of one country recognizing as a legal tender. And more and more countries, right, at some point of time will start recognizing it. And when that happens, it will be a very different future for Bitcoins or any other cryptocurrencies. Let's move that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So basically, this is excess. I will not get into this. This is where you can buy cryptocurrencies and sell cryptocurrencies. Let's move on. Let's go to the legal side. Legal landscape. Yeah. Okay. So basically, I think we just talked about Supreme Court judgment. Now, Supreme Court judgment really is very, very interesting, very deep. So what Supreme Court judgment said, in essence, is that actually RBI said that RBI has power to regulate this space because Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies have a feature to act like money, and because they have a feature to act like money, they do have a power to regulate. However, they said that the action of ban from opening accounts for cryptocurrencies companies was something which was not in line, or which was not in requirement. They could have done lesser drastic step or lesser restrictive step which is like regulating rather than banning. So that's the position they said. They said that the action of RBI was not commensurate with the problem in hand. So few things which come up. Of course, main important thing was the ban was lifted and suddenly cryptocurrency industry came back to life, which actually had died. But few interesting things also were observed in cryptocurrency in the Supreme Court judgment. RBI had made few points as a submission. They said that they are not legal tender. Earlier it was our interpretation, now it is the RBI statement. RBI also said that it is not a payment system under the Payment System Settlement Act. So this is also a statement. Now we can take it forward and say it is not part of a Payment Settlement Act. Supreme Court also said that it has characteristic of an intangible property. It's an intangible property characteristic of goods and commodities. And RBI also said that they don't recognize as a currency. So this also gives credence to some of the interpretation which we had taken earlier, saying that it is not a legal tender, it is not a currency, it is actually more like goods and commodities. This particular judgment gives little more legal weight to some of the interpretation which we were taking. So these are the benefits of Supreme Court judgment. Go next. We don't have any specific law as yet, and I will not dwell into it right now, but it is not that RBI or any other authorities don't have power to regulate. It is more that they don't want to regulate, because the moment they regulate, they will actually recognize cryptocurrency, and the moment they recognize cryptocurrency, they will actually accept cryptocurrency. So that's why they don't want to regulate. They are saying that, look, we don't even recognize cryptocurrency, so we can't regulate something we don't recognize. That's a position they are taking. At some point of time, that will change in future, but that is current position. That's why they are refusing to regulate. That's why you don't have any specific regulations in this particular space. But having said it, there are a lot of existing laws which are applicable, including from SCRA perspective. You need to look from exchanges, whether they are stock exchanges, whether the Bitcoin possibly is not is more like a financial instrument, but there are more than 5,000 tokens, and whether those tokens are currencies or not, securities or not, or they are utility tokens. So there are various categories of tokens which it can fall into, and that's what one needs to look at. Whether some of the tokens, whether they are securities tokens, then if you do a ICO, which is the initial coin offering, whether it will attract any securities related issues, right? So those kind of things you need to check. In India, we have not seen many ICOs, or rather we don't see any ICO because of these issues. But these are important areas one needs to look into. Then of course there is a FDI. There are a lot of questions on FDI thing. If you're in cryptocurrency business and if you get investment, is it other financial services and you require government approval in getting a foreign investment, or it is not? So those are interesting questions from interpretation perspective. And we always say that there is no straight answer. It really depends on exactly facts and circumstances which that person or that company is actually working on or doing. And depending on your business model, you could become other financial services, or you could become just a marketplace, or you could become something else, right? So really speaking, there are a lot of questions which you need to look at it, but it really depends on how the business is modeled, and sometimes you will have to tweak the model to make sure you are in compliance with some of the foreign direct investment regulations. Now, similarly, Prevention of Money Laundering Act is very critical in this particular space, considering how we have seen the usage. Now, as Nishit Bhai was mentioning earlier, when we started advising the cryptocurrency companies in 2014, we told them two things. We told them, one, make sure that you don't ever accept cash. And second, So basically, any money which you get should be from banks or from credit cards. And second, always do a KYC. You are not required by law, but you should always do a KYC, because Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrencies, right? It's a very transparent mechanism. Everybody in the world knows what transaction is happening, but the transparency ends at the wallet, which means if somebody has asked for ransomware, right? People will know how much money that person got, because everything is transparent. But it will go to the wallet, and who owns the wallet is anonymous. Now, the moment you connect wallet with a particular person, the whole cryptocurrency transaction then becomes completely transparent and on record. And that's why we said that you always make sure that you do KYC, you connect wallet to an individual, so that tomorrow if any regulatory agency asks, you have an ability to go and say, hey, this is the person, and hence reduce the chance or reduce the ability for anyone to launder any money or do anything which otherwise would get you into problem. So that's why this is something which was not required under law, but it is done by almost every cryptocurrency company in India. So that's something which, can we go next? Yeah. Then of course you have Consumer Protection Act and Companies Act. Both have. Companies Act has actually asked for declaration on cryptocurrency and virtual currency, what every company is owning. And then so that is that, again, deposits become very important when somebody is using cryptocurrency for purpose of using it as a money or storing value. So that's when deposits become very important. So that's the other area which one needs to look into. Consumer Protection Act we just discussed does cover cryptocurrency, especially the buying and selling of cryptocurrency, and a lot of issues which are otherwise covered in Consumer Protection Act also will get covered when you are, especially in a business of cryptocurrency exchange. Can we go next? Recent RBI clarification, I think I will leave it to maybe Purushottam. You want to take this slide and the next slide?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just quickly go through it given the paucity of time. So we got a recent clarification on May 31st when the RBI said that, so before a little background to this is that there were reports going around that banks were refusing to even facilitate with cryptocurrency transactions, and they were citing the 2018 RBI circular as a excuse or as a ground for refusing to settle these transactions. Now, because of these growing reports, RBI had recently published in May 31st that you can't use the circular that was struck down by the Supreme Court and to justify not settling transactions or not facilitating cryptocurrency transactions. But the important thing here to note is that the RBI did not say that banks can facilitate cryptocurrency transactions. It merely said that you can't use the April 2018 circular to not facilitate cryptocurrency transactions. Of course, as Vaibhav said, the importance of anti-money laundering practices, the importance of KYC practices, as you can see on the screen, even the RBI has stressed on it, and it has clearly called out that all the banks should undertake KYC measures and anti-money laundering measures and combating of financing of terrorism measures. So that was the circular on May 31st, 2021. We have seen, other than the legal developments that Vaibhav has talked about, we have seen some developments on the policy front from the Indian government. So initially, as we all know, the RBI has always taken a protective stance, even before the Supreme Court judgment, and even after the Supreme Court judgment, they continue to take a protective stance. But on the other hand, while there are cryptocurrencies that RBI has been critical about, RBI has also proposed that it will form its own cryptocurrency. The only difference is that this cryptocurrency, called the central bank digital currency, the RBI had proposed it before, and you can also see it in a January 2021 publication of the RBI. This will be based on the rupee. So it will directly, because it's based on the rupee, it will directly, it's directly dependent on the rupee, and that is why it is not volatile like how usual cryptocurrencies are, and therefore that risk factor is taken out. So the RBI had proposed this in January 2021, but there has been no further progress on this. So we have to see. We know that there was a bill in the parliament banning cryptocurrencies in 2019. There is again a revised bill of cryptocurrency and regulation of official digital currency bill 2021, which was supposed to be tabled in the budget session of this parliament back in March, April. The interesting thing to note this is that the previous version of this bill said the title of the bill was banning of cryptocurrency, but now it's you can see this version has the title cryptocurrency and regulation of official digital currency bill. What happened was in the budget session it wasn't tabled at all, so it did not come up for discussion. We might expect it to come in the monsoon session, but we don't know yet. We have seen some statements from the finance minister and from sources from the central government that now they are revising or now they're relooking at their stance of regulating cryptocurrency. So back the position before was that they were very critical. Now, like for example, if you can see on the third point, the finance minister has said they're not shutting all options, and the central government has also said they might set up a fresh panel to study cryptocurrency. I think we can go to the taxation aspect of cryptocurrency now. So I'll hand over the podium to Mayappan and let him take it forward.
So on taxes, very quickly, I think most of you have probably read quite a bit on how crypto is to be taxed, and I think most of the points I'm going to make may already be familiar to some extent, but there are the speed at which this is moving, I think there are new issues that always come up.
Mayappan, voice is not clear.
Yeah. Now it's breaking.
Sorry, my internet may be an issue. Isn't better?
No, do you have earplugs or something? Because I think this is not working out.
Sorry, give me a second.
All right, is this better?
Yeah, if you speak up a little bit, perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Okay, great. So I was saying that I think a couple of these, I'm going to quickly run through some of the tax issues that come up from a direct tax, indirect tax, and from an equalization levy perspective. Of course, there are no official guidance today on several of these issues, which we have raised several years back, and we are still waiting for official guidance. And I think mostly advisors have taken positions based on the currently available information. So I think the first thing that is important to look at is how do we classify crypto as either goods, property, or currency? And Vaibhav, of course, dealt with the Supreme Court judgment, and the answer is not entirely clear on that today. From an income tax perspective, I think there is always discussion around how is the asset held by the person, whether it is capital asset or stock in trade, and how there are questions around how the capital gain is to be computed, what is the valuation, and I think there are also questions around what is the cost of acquisition in case of if it's treated as a capital asset, and what happens with respect to self-generated assets, and do we get to deduct mining expenses or not? So these are all, again, unanswered issues. We can take positions as advisors to the best extent possible. But I think through this presentation, I'm going to not really get into how it should finally be resolved, but more flagging what are the different issues we need to keep in mind, because there are, I think these issues have been around for a while, but some of the later issues are more recent developments. Now, the last bullet point that will take us into the next slide is around significant economic presence. And this has been more recently in the news. This is because significant economic presence was introduced a couple of years back, saying that a foreign company would have a business connection in India if there are, and the two tests are met, and these thresholds have been notified very recently, a couple of months back. One threshold is if the foreign company transacts with someone in India in relation to any good or property where the value is more than 2 crores in a particular year. And the second threshold is if the foreign company has more than 3 lakh users in India in any given year, then there is a business connection created and income will be attributable to India and taxed in India. Now, in most cases, there is a lot of background to where this is coming from with respect to the global discussion on Pillar 1 and how digital companies should be taxed. But in the present case, it was anticipated that this is not going to have much of an impact till such time there is tax treaties in place. So one of the few items that actually may get caught out outside the tax treaty protection is businesses of cryptocurrency exchanges, because many of them tend to be located in non-treaty jurisdictions sometimes. So they actually have a more real exposure towards creating a significant economic presence, considering the value of the cryptocurrency, exceeding transaction value of 2 crores or more, or having users of more than 3 lakhs in India. These are quite, I think, easy for maybe some exchanges to actually qualify for. So if we go to the next slide, perhaps this is maybe not yet been picked up by the tax department, but we have seen recent news reports around that whether equalization levy is applicable or not to the operations of offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. And there does seem to be some action happening on this front. And if we go to the next slide on equalization levy, I'm sure most of you will be familiar that this is the alternative method of taxing offshore digital companies with kind of operations in India. So the first question would be around whether the crypto exchange, offshore exchange, will qualify as an e-commerce operator. Then if so, then whether crypto assets, including cryptocurrencies, whether they would qualify as goods, or whether any services rendered by the e-commerce operator, by the crypto exchange, will qualify as a service. And any fees charged, therefore, for those will be subject to the 2% equalization levy or not. Now, of course, there is also confusion in the equalization levy around what is the tax base and on what tax base is the 2% applicable, because there are certain deeming fictions that came through in the last budget saying that even if you don't charge a commission or a fee, then the underlying value of the good that is sold, that will also form part of the tax base. Now, this becomes a particularly big issue for the exchanges, which can run both models, the OTC model and the marketplace model. So in the over-the-counter model, the exchange buys and sells in its own name back to back. In the marketplace model, they operate more as a marketplace, connecting buyer and seller, and they charge commission. But after the deeming fiction under EL, I think even in both cases, it's likely that EL will be payable on the entire sort of value of the crypto and their commission. Now, one interesting thing is supplies by Indian sellers have been carved out. So if we are looking at what happens with Indian sellers, that may not end up being taxed under EL, because those are excluded from the tax base for EL. So there are quite a few issues there which may be arising, and if the exchanges have not taken this into account, this could be a particular pain point. But going forward in the future, it's either equalization levy or significant economic presence, which may apply to these companies depending on which country they are located, and they need to be very careful about structuring their operations accordingly. These other issues that come up under direct tax is, of course, withholding obligations under 194O. Now, what 194O says is that if any platform, digital platform, facilitates the sale of goods, and again, all of this is contingent on cryptocurrencies ultimately be categorized as goods, right? That then the platform will withhold 1% of the value of the transaction and pay it as taxes. And this applies only when the seller is a resident seller of a particular good on the platform, and it applies even if the platform is in India or outside of India. So these are all aspects, I think, which may not have been raised as such by the tax authorities, but can become pain points in the future. Similar to the equalization levy, there are again concerns around what will be the tax base for withholding. whether it will be just the service fee or the commission that the operator charges, or whether it will also be on the entire value of the crypto, which would make a big difference. Now, going to the next slide, I think very quickly I'll skip these through, but 206C and 194Q impose TCS and TDS obligations on the sellers and buyers in very high value transactions. So this could be something that individuals who are entering into such trades may need to be a little careful around. So going to the next one, then coming to indirect tax. First of all, for GST to apply, I think it has to be a supply of a good. Now, when we are talking about transacting in crypto, we have looked at the definition of goods, and it broadly defines it as movable property other than money or currency. And we have similar sort of definitions under Sale of Goods Act and the CGST Act. So if we go to the next slide, then, and as Vaibhav was correctly saying, I think El Salvador has recently declared it to be currency. And what that means is that we are examining this as to whether does that mean that this becomes money for the purposes of GST, in which case then money will not be covered under GST at all. But if it is a good, then there are significant GST implications where, and if we go to the next slide, there are significant GST issues for exchanges where, first of all, for it to be a supply, you will look at whether it's in the furtherance of course of business or not. And this matters because sometimes when individuals buy and sell crypto, it may not necessarily be in the furtherance of business, but from the exchange's perspective, this becomes more likely to apply. And when it qualifies as a supply, that's when GST is applicable in the residuary rate of 18%. Then there could be issues around the services rendered by the crypto exchange itself, when particularly in an offshore scenario, whether their services or their service fees is subject to GST or not. And that commission can be subject to GST if it is an import of a service, or if it is if it's an intermediary service performed from India. But if it's outside of India and it's an intermediary service, GST will not apply. Another challenge with crypto when it comes to GST is also how do we fix the location of the goods, because and that's important when we are looking at it from an import of crypto and an export of crypto perspective, because without fixing the location of crypto, it becomes difficult to qualify it as an import or export and apply the GST requirements there. When it's a crypto to crypto sale or a crypto for paid as consideration for goods, it could amount to barter, and you may actually have to pay GST on both legs of supply. And on TCS provisions, there are for offshore operators, when there are goods being sold through the exchange, it is possible that TCS may also apply on such operators. So, and the other onerous aspect is if you are subject to TCS and this is considered as goods, you may have to register in every state in India as well to be in compliance with TCS provisions. So there are quite a few onerous provisions, which today it's not clear whether tax authorities are looking at it this way, but could become significant challenges in the future. Now, coming to what guidance do we actually have on taxation from the government, is there is certain questions were raised in the parliament, and we have an answer by the Minister of State from the Ministry of Finance saying that yes, crypto is something that will be taxable as capital gains, and they also mentioned GST being applicable. However, beyond this, we don't really have any official guidance from the CBIC or the CBDT on how this is to be taxed. Moving on, very quickly in 2 slides, I wanted to cover NFTs because this is slightly, as I said, I think crypto space is evolving very fast. In the NFT market, which is a non-fungible token, I think the 2 distinctions we need to keep in mind is that, first of all, an NFT is minted, and there is something called a gas fee that is paid to the blockchain that is generating the NFT. And secondly, then there is the marketplace where the NFT is traded. And these, how do we apply the previous? So if you move on to the next couple of slides, I think, yes. So coming back to the tax issues and what does this NFT transaction means? from a GST or equalization levy perspective, I think the gas fee is something that is directly paid to the blockchain, and sometimes these NFTs transactions are automated contracts as well. So this is not like a typical marketplace where the money is in the control of a marketplace and then paid forward. So there could be issues in complying with TCS or TDS provisions, etc., where the money actually doesn't flow through you. So that's a very quick summary on the different upcoming issues on tax, and I'll leave it to Nishit Bhai or Vaibhav to explain the other work that you've done in this space. Thank you.
Do you want to take? I saw while I was hearing Mayappan, and I was also seeing the Q&A. There are a few questions which have come. Is it okay if I take some of these questions and address them from legal perspective?
Yeah, go ahead. I think there are a lot of questions.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, but there are a few basic questions, or they all fall into one category. So I will not go and call out the questions, but let me answer questions in terms of how it works, right? So when you're talking about mining, right, there is a question saying that who gets the money, right? So when you are mining, it is just like a gold, right? That whoever discovers it, whoever mines it, becomes the owner of cryptocurrency. There is no money which is paid to the person who has created that cryptocurrency. Just like how when you mine it, you get the gold, right? You don't pay Earth or anyone else any money for purchasing gold. So mining really is where it is generated, and whoever mines it gets it. And the mining actually is done by algorithms, and you working on using your computing power to solve a particular puzzle or a question or other things which are there, and that is considered to be mining, which allows you to get cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. And also this is where you participate in the public blockchain, and that's when you participate in public blockchain, you are participating in mining, which gives you cryptocurrency. And that's why you see a lot of people are participating in public blockchain. And that is what makes the whole blockchain system work, because now you have millions and millions of computers who are participating in a public blockchain, who help to get get the transactions done, right? Because transactions are done on blockchain because there are millions of computers who are saying, yes, this transaction is correctly done. And that's when the mining also happens. So mining and blockchain transactions are very closely connected. And once the mining is generated, is successful, a person gets a Bitcoin, then he owns the Bitcoin and he can transfer. And when he transfers, somebody pays money for it, and then he keeps money. It's just like how you do with gold, right? So that's one of the questions, or there were a series of questions on that. I just had to take that particular point. There was another question, there were a series of other questions, which basically says that can I use LRS money to purchase Bitcoins or cryptocurrencies outside? Now, I will answer this in a lawyery way, which means that you can or you may not be able to. Really depends on what cryptocurrency you are purchasing. If you are purchasing Bitcoin, then we have found that under current FEMA, there is honestly no restriction for you to use your LRS for purchase of Bitcoin, right? In certain cryptocurrencies, there could be restrictions, right? Again, things are not crystal clear, very clear, but there are very good arguments to say that sending an LRS money for purchasing of cryptocurrencies is permitted, right? Certain situations, certain tokens or coins, right, may not be permitted. Certain coins, there is clarity that it is permitted, right? So if a coin is more like a security, then it is permitted. It's more like a currency, then you need to see exactly what role it plays, whether it is USD Tether or it is like Bitcoin or Ethereum, then it is permitted. USD Tether may or may not be permitted. Again, so I'm not getting into the individual coins, but depends on what coins you are purchasing. But most of the coins you should be able to send LRS and purchase it, doing on the foreign exchanges. Of course, acquisition levy maybe would be applicable based on some of the recent news items and what Mayappan told. Also, practically, banks will not ask you or allow you or permit you to do it. That's a different question. But honestly, there is no restriction we have found, or there are good arguments to interpret current law to say that LRS money can be used to purchase most of the coins outside India. Second question was with respect to cross-border crypto to crypto transactions, which means that instead of sending money outside, can I go and send Bitcoins to purchase Ethers, right? And exchange it for Ethers on an outside exchange, a non-India exchange perspective. The answer which we see is under FEMA, it is not possible. It is actually a cross-border barter which requires prior government approval. However, many of them do it, and RBI or banks cannot really figure out because they don't have any mechanism to figuring out this kind of transaction. So it goes under the radar. But legally, if you are saying that, can I send Bitcoins and exchange it for Ethers? The answer is no if it is cross-border in nature. If it is within India, then fine, it's barter and barter is okay. Now, similarly, there was another question which was raised saying that a software developer actually develops software and get coins and they go and sell it on WazirX and get money. Is that legal? Now, if the development is happening for non-Indian company, which means there's an Indian software developer actually developing software for, let's say, a US company, right? Or a Bermuda company. And Bermuda company is giving coin for software development. This also becomes cross-border barter. And really speaking, cross-border barter requires prior RBI approval. And hence, really, you cannot do this cross-border barter. A software development legally cannot provide services to a non-Indian company and get coin instead of getting USD or any foreign exchange, which he has to remit through authorized banking dealers, right? So that is what the legal position is. But a lot of software developers don't realize it and they are doing it, but that's not legal. So these were some of the few questions which I'd raised. I thought I will answer it, which hopefully covers many of the questions. But there are other questions, then I will go and
Vaibhav, is the presentation done or is there something left? We can.
Presentation is done. We can remove the presentation. Yes.
Okay.
Nishit, do you want to? Okay, fine. We can remove the.
Yeah, if does Nishit want to be? See, there are still some basic questions on, maybe you could articulate.
I think, Ninad, maybe you can moderate the questions if you're.
Sure.
I don't want to deprive people of their.
Sure. No, we'll take it fast because.
Sorry for that, because I thought we can give a whole idea about ecosystem current.
Sure, no, this was comprehensive, all the presentation. I think, Vaibhav, you could just articulate a little bit, because a lot of people are still asking about value, number of Bitcoins, algorithm, how it actually happens. That's still an intrigue in a lot of people's mind. There are still more questions. And then I will ask you some other questions as well, specific. Vaibhav, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am muted.
You had a slide, on the one of the first slides was there, right?
On how Bitcoin works. Okay, I will just tell you. Nina, sorry, is your question how Bitcoin works? Is that what your question is?
See, I think the whole aspect of algorithm, supply, valuation, just 2 minutes on that, because that's still a question in everyone's mind. How does the value keep floating, fluctuating? What are the number of Bitcoins? Who controls it? We know it, but maybe you can articulate it.
And one of the recurring questions I saw was who decides the value of Bitcoin?
Correct. Yeah. So
okay, I will address that. Yeah, I will address those questions. Sure. So basically, Bitcoin, right? We always give analogy of gold, right? In that sense, right? So gold, when you look at it, how exactly it is mined. So Bitcoin is like digital gold, right? That you mine it, you get it, you own the particular Bitcoin. Now, there is no underlying asset. This is also one of the questions. Is there any underlying asset under Bitcoin? There is no underlying asset at all under Bitcoin. Just like how gold does not have any underlying asset. Gold itself becomes the underlying asset for various other other instruments, right? Similarly, Bitcoin is like gold, digital gold. There is no underlying asset for Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin becomes valuable because people believe that this is a valuable aspect, right? So it is purely based on supply and demand. And that's why when you look at, when Elon Musk or someone else makes a speech, right, the price fluctuates because that creates impression in the mind of people whether this will be globally accepted or it won't be globally accepted. So the price of Bitcoin increases if there is a larger global acceptance of Bitcoin to be used as digital money. Price decreases if people start rejecting Bitcoin as a global form of payment or storing value, right? So when China banned mining, the price decreased, right? When Elon Musk mentioned that it takes a lot of electricity, the price decreased. So the price actually fluctuates based on supply and demand and the sentiments, because the value of Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency will come if everybody or large number of people accepts it as a digital payment mechanism or a storing value. So I think that's the reason why the price fluctuates
Just
substantially.
Here for a minute,
Sure.
Let us understand from, I would say, legal or market perspective, there's difference between price and a value. Value is a matter of perception. Okay. Beauty lies in beholder, right? Value lies in perception. Price is a function of demand and supply. Now, when the quantity is finite, price discovery is better. If there's only one Mona Lisa, people can bid millions of dollars, right? But if you have hundreds of them, it will not have that kind of price. So similarly here, Bitcoins can be maximum 21 million. About 18, 19 might have already been mined already now. So as far as Bitcoins are concerned, the price discovery is better because now, in world there are only 21 million. When government comes up with fiat currency, today there is no limit on notes they can print. There is nothing that is underlying there except the confidence, the trust. Okay. So when Nixon came, he de-linked dollar from the gold. Okay. So now what is that dollar? Even rupee, what is it? It's a piece of paper. Okay. It's your trust in the government. That is what is determining its value, whatever you call it, right? So we have to realize that price is around changing because people are figuring out that there'll be more and more use of blockchain and more use of the crypto as we go along, including, for example, the fact that Ethereum has more applications. For example, smart contracts. In future, contracts will be called smart contracts used by blockchain and stuff like that. So Ethereum driven contracts will become a norm in next 5-7 years. So more application of the technology behind that also, would make it more usable. And in simple ways, I don't want to go too long. You can extend your conference a little bit, but let me simply explain. It is like loyalty point. Have you heard of loyalty points? Airline, hotels, American Express and others do it. How does, at one point of time, if you've flown an aircraft, only that airline you can get free tickets and other. Then they expanded that even if you travel on any other airline within the group, okay, so they started it. Then they say, okay, you can use this mileage even to stay in hotel. Like American Express gives you loyalty points. You can buy silverware, you can do this. So slowly, that is also, so loyalty point has become the single largest market, financial market outside the formal system. Nobody recognizes it, fortunately. Otherwise, you can do anything. If you want, if you have a certain amount of mileages, certain points, you can even pay and buy more mileages. So this is Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. I think there are 42 of them or something like that. Different currencies would get more value depending on this usability in the group. So that is what I would think that differentiates. Just sorry for my extending this conversation, because this question keeps on coming up all the time.
No, thank you, Nishit Bhai. That was, I think because that's the fundamental clarity which attendees have, then, it's easy. But thank you for clarifying. I will take.
Let me just say,
Go ahead.
we are playing a game of Monopoly. Then remember when you were children.
Correct.
So if you treat between two children that have got so much, it's a fake money. But they say, I'll give you this money, you give me a pencil, you give me a rubber. Okay, another one says, okay, postal stamps. At one point of time, we used to exchange and say, I'll give you this stamp and you give me this 2 stamps, or you give me this product or notebook or whatever it is, right? So the bitcoins and other currencies have become something like that. So when you mentally start thinking monopoly rupees or pounds are the same thing as real currency, another person also thinks the same way, its tradability comes up. That's just to give you a simple example.
Great, amazing example. Very, very, you've explained a complex thing in a very simple words. Maybe I'll take some specific questions. I think we've covered more of the general questions. So Naman Malu is asking again, will Bitcoin be considered as freely convertible foreign exchange to fulfill the requirement of export under GST?
Right now, it is not considered at all. In fact, it's considered more like a commodity from regulator perspective. But we have to examine if El Salvador has made it, right? And if you are importing or exporting to El Salvador, then they will get payment in Bitcoin. Then yes, that can be considered to be a foreign currency. So we need to examine how, when country starts recognizing them, Bitcoins or any other currency as legal tender, then how we will address that particular thing from foreign currency perspective. But saving that aspect aside, it is not currently considered to be a foreign currency. It's not considered to be something which you can use to, on an export, get money in that currency.
Okay, great.
I'm just doing some research. Recently we argued that case in case of Aberdeen. That was the first case where we applied for a private international law to tax matters in India. Okay. So I won't go into the details, but if so private international law application, so whatever is the law abroad, for example, Companies Act, okay, abroad, if that company is that it is bound by, India will accept that Companies Act for that purpose of determination of the character and stuff like that. So application of private international law is that foreign law when voluntarily applied by the municipal court. Municipal means local Indian courts. That is application. So if the Salvador has actually currently it is in the state of discussion. So they have declared that they will do it. So after Congress passes in Salvador, then 90 days after that it will become a currency. But then can we say that now Salvador has treated this as a currency of its own country? That means we will recognize as a foreign currency. That an application of private international, how it will unfold. I'm still working on it. This is a very recent one. But just to give you one perspective, that normally it will not be regarded as a foreign currency. But now that it has given legal recognition, it will become legal tender. Now, what does it mean? Otherwise, every foreign currency is nothing else but a foreign piece of paper. Right?
Sure. I'll take 2-3 specific questions, and maybe we'll extend from 7:45 to wind up by 7:50. If you don't know, if you all agree. So Milind Telavne Vaibhav has asked, what is Coinbase summons?
Yeah, so I can take that up.
Sure. Suril, yeah.
The Coinbase summons were basically the IRS has sent out, has asked that any crypto, that IRS will have access to see the accounts of the various crypto accounts that Coinbase holds for, for taxation purposes, so that they can have access. So when the IRS asks them to open them, they have access to it. So basically it's along those lines, and that's what it is. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but in a gist, that's what it is.
Okay, great. No, that's a good, quick answer. There's a specific question on tax, so maybe I'll take that because there are a lot of can an NRI who bought crypto while outside India retain it after coming back to India?
Sure. Is that from a tax perspective or?
Yeah, tax perspective you can give.
Sure. I think the challenge here again, as we had adverted to, was what happens to the location of the asset. And I think it's a combination of how we view it also under regulatory laws, which maybe Vaibhav can speak about. But generally, when you, we've tried to approximate the nexus or the location of the crypto to where the user is actually located, unless it's in, it's in a different physical format or in a physical hard wallet. Otherwise, generally, that's we use the analogy of where IP would otherwise be located. So if a person, NRI, earns it outside of India and comes back into India with the asset, I think you will consider it generally as being in India, and you will declare it in your returns, and any future sales will happen, you will actually pay taxes on that.
So just to add to my point, say,
Go ahead.
Intellectual property, copyrights, that resides where the holder of the property is generally. You follow?
Correct.
If you consider this intangible, it moves along with you. You got it, no?
Sure, right.
And so I think those are the kind of things.
So just to add to what Mayappan and Nishit said, right? So it is like as we interpret this, that this is an intangible property, and hence the location is where the owner is, right? It is not, doesn't matter whether the wallet is sitting in India or wallet is sitting outside India. Wallet is just a place or location where it demonstrates that you own that particular property, but because it's intangible, it's like, if you have a patent right? If a certificate has been given that you own this patent, and if you keep patent in US or you keep patent in India, it doesn't matter. If you're an owner of patent, the right goes where you are residing. So that's the way we look at it. So wallet location is, in our view, immaterial. It is the ownership of who owns that particular cryptocurrency, which is used to determine both issues from FEMA perspective, also from taxation perspective, right? So if you are moving from US to India, the asset is also moving from US to India. If you're moving from Dubai to India, the asset is also moving from Dubai to India.
Just to add one, I'm sorry, I'm going on.
Sure, go ahead. No, of course.
Intellectual discussion. So, and with chartered accountants, is wonderful to, and sorry for my extending conversation. But, under private international law, the asset generally resides where it can be effectively dealt with. For example, shares of a company. Where are they located? In India, they are located where the register of shares is maintained. Under Indian Companies Act, you can also have a register of shares outside India, subject to permission or whatever. Then if it is outside India, where the shares are located. Okay, that's another. Typically, our mindset is that where the company is incorporated is the place, but actually it is where it can be effectively dealt with. In the US, shares are considered intangible property. Share certificate is a tangible, physical, but shares itself is intangible. So under Code Section 865 of Internal Revenue Code in the US, the shares are deemed to be, when you sell the shares, or even of Indian company by American resident, the principle is that the source of capital gain on sale of Indian shares by a US person is deemed to be US source, because they consider that the shares reside where it's intangible, it resides where the where the shareholder resides. Okay, and therefore they have first right to tax. India says no, because company is here, therefore we have first right to tax. So there is a disconnect between the two, and the treaty says that both countries can tax in accordance with their own law, therefore tax credit issues are there. I don't want to go into details at this point in time. I'm just mentioning a principle. That general principle is intangible resides where the holder of the intangible resides. Okay, I'm sorry I went on a little long.
No, I think it's good, Nishit, that you've clarified more. I will take, just last two questions. There's a specific question on tax, and I think it's gathering a lot more chartered accountants. So in fairness, I would like to take that up. Whether crypto is considered as a security for income tax purpose and will be covered under capital gains if one trades regularly, or it is business?
Sure. I think the current communication, or the only kind of view expressed by a government official is that crypto is generally can be considered to be a capital asset. If not, I think if it is being held for trading purposes, then there is arguments to say it's business income and will be taxed under that appropriate head of income. And I think that's the only clarity we have today.
Okay, and another question, since Mayapan, you're there, last question is, can business accept crypto as consideration or will it be covered by 269 ST?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question, which I see come up more recently now, also being a recent provision. And this is something I will be able to give a bit more detail on. Now, if we look at the provisions of 269 ST, right, what it says is that you can't accept more than, I think, 2 lakhs a day. Correct. In terms of other than through regular banking channels. And, so the challenge is now, of course, let's assume for the purposes of the discussion now that we are treating it as a capital, as an asset, as a property, and not really as an intangible asset and not money. So the question then is, are we in violation of 269 ST? But if we look at the genesis of what 269 ST is trying to do, there is a bit of one of the objectives why the section was introduced was to kind of prevent black money and payments through cash or unaccounted cash. So strictly speaking, I think 2 views are possible. One is to say that, yes, I think crypto as an asset, if it has no connection to black money or any such risks, I think it shouldn't fall foul of that, because even in several transactions, there are times when, let's say, instead of paying in cash for let's say for an investment in a company, right, you can pay in kind, you could exchange, you could convert shares into a different instrument, or, like a CCP into shares. Now, these things shouldn't fall foul of 269 ST. That wasn't the objective. So I think from that perspective, but there is a concern that crypto money is also connected to black money and illicit proceeds at some level. So in certain questions, there could be, in certain circumstances, it could certainly apply.
So there are a lot of questions, but I'm going to ask you the last one. And we all know you as a forward-looking, progressive individual. What role? There's a question. This is not my question. What role can chartered accountants play in this entire ecosystem of cryptocurrency, decentralized finance, and the evolving future of money?
I would just say that it's a minefield. I think you have huge opportunities in this area. And while lawyers will clarify the legal situation, but you have actual work to do on the ground, whether in terms of valuation, in terms of, the entries, the tax issues. So I think definitely there are going to be a lot of questions that will be coming up. Every kind of question, I think today you do a lot more than just accounting, including, for example, Companies Act requires you to, account them and during your audits, otherwise these issues will come up. So I have no doubt that this is going to throw up a lot of opportunities if you understand the nuances. And once it becomes cross-border, even it will become bigger. Once it becomes interplay between 42 currencies, which are there, maybe more. Okay, how do you look at exchange rates? Same way. Foreign exchange, you have different currencies. How do you account for it? How do you go about it? I think all these questions are going to be very, very interesting, and you have huge future, I think, in crypto.
Huge future, a lot of opportunities, exciting. Nishit Bhai has said all the right things. I'd like to wind it down. If any of you have any closing comments, last 1 or 2 words, sentences, I would leave it to you, Nishit Bhai and your team. Yeah.
I can just start and others can end. I would say that if you focus on crypto, like young kids, you'll always remain young, energetic, futuristic, so you won't get, old. And intellectually, it will be very fulfilling, because once you're intellectually stimulated, you never get old. So this is my medical therapy to answer on crypto.
Never get old. Join the crypto bandwagon. Suril, you want to say anything? Then Vaibhav, and then Mayapan, just 1 or 2 lines. Yeah, just to
so the genie is out of the bottle now, right? The Bitcoin white paper is in the public domain, and however now you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? So crypto is here to stay. In which form, whether it be Bitcoin or whether it be Ethereum, that remains a big question mark. And there will be millions of cryptocurrencies, just like there are millions of websites. There'll be millions of cryptocurrencies, and each will have its own uniqueness. And that's what I would like to say. That it's evolving very fast. It's going very rapidly, and it's an exciting space to be in.
Genie's out of the bottle. Exciting space. Vaibhav, 1 or 2 lines?
Yeah, sure. So the way I look at it, the law is going to evolve and constantly evolve, not just in India, but everywhere in the world. So anything what you do, you need to keep in mind that things are going to evolve. And law is always going to play a catch up. So when you are actually doing business, you need to go beyond what current laws are from compliance perspective or from perspective of thinking how you will do business, right? You should add few of your own laws, right? Put ethical standards. Say something. For example, if tomorrow it comes in the front page of newspaper, would you be proud of you? Would your parents be proud of you, right? So keep that ethical standard in mind when you apply law and do crypto business. I think that's the way I'm looking at it.
Okay, apply ethical standard. Would you like to add anything, Meyyappan and Purushottam? Just 1 or 2 lines.
Sure, very quickly. I think there are a lot of open questions and unresolved issues. And I think with the increasing valuations, the spotlight from the tax authorities is as recently as a few days back is on the ecosystem. I think we are only beginning on the different notices and questions and issues that will come up in this space. So I think we're all looking to an active future in this space.
Active future in this space. Yes. Purushottam, you want to add just 1 or 2 lines?
Yeah, I think the unknown always creates fear, right? So I think the most important thing is to understand what this is first. So I see a lot of basic questions on blockchain and cryptocurrency, the underlying technology. So maybe starting with that will help. And then we can understand what is allowed and what is not allowed and what is ethical and not ethical.
Great. I think that summed up excellent session by Nishit Desai and his partners. I'm delighted that I could moderate the session. As usual, Nishit Bhai is open with his knowledge, open source as he calls it. This was a session where I learned a lot. I hope all of you, ladies and gentlemen, learned something from the session. You must give a big round of applause to Nishit Bhai and his team. And then it's over to your BCA team for any closing comments.
Thank you, Ninad Bhai. It was a 360-degree view on this particular subject. And this kind of discussions and expert chats will bring the subject in the ecosystem of the professionals like us. And thank you, Nishit Bhai, for ending on a very optimistic note for this. And with these brief remarks, I give it to Mr. Mihir for vote of thanks.
Thank you, President. Thank you, team. Nishit Bhai, before I go on to giving this very well-deserved vote of thanks, let me make announcement of some important events in the days to come. On the 6th of July, which is a founding day of BCS, we have Azim Premji giving us talk on professional excellence and social responsibility. On the 25th of June, we have constitutionality of tax laws by Mr. Harish Salve. This is a joint meeting with the ITAT. On the between 12th and 16th of August, there is a 25th International Tax and Finance Conference. And in the month of July, we have the intermediate course of BCS Idea Analytics School for Internal Audit. And between the 1st April, which is a continuing course, to 31st March 22, it's a long-term course. There is a forensic accounting and investigation studies, which is happening. And lastly, there is a lecture meeting, which is available free by Human Resource Committee on creating high-performing organization. Now, let me go on to giving a very well-deserved vote of thanks to this excellent team. Nishit Bhai, we have always been in awe, and we have always appreciated your involvement with BCS. And thank you for the entire team of this very distinguished guest to be with us to really clarify a lot of concept. You know, it is always very difficult when you have a mixed crowd. There are some people who are absolutely novice, not knowing about this concept, and there are people who know something. And you have really, with your team, integrated this, you know, intricacies with simple concepts in such a beautiful way that it has come out as a holistic concept. But there is one more thing which I would like to say, which was a very hidden takeaway from what you said, of how you really grew your firm. And I'm quite sure all those who are wanting to grow their practice would have a great takeaway out of this, that anticipate, prepare, and deliver. Now you have provided this platform, and I'm quite sure a lot of people would like to take in on the basis of the facts and certain hints and links that you were given to take it on from there. Thank you, Suril. It was, you know, a very wonderful hearing you and getting this perspective of trust, which one very, you know, one when looks at it, it becomes very evident that yes, it is the trust or a deficit of trust that really has evolved into a new era of currency management. Vaibhav, you've given an Indian landscape. You've given us the opportunities. You've given us the legal landscape, position of the regulations. And I think that would be really very, very important when one goes on to the ground level. Security contract regulations, prevention of money laundering, all these are the acts which one will have to really relate to find out the position. Purushottam, thank you for apprising us of the RBI circular and the policy movements. And Meyyappan, you have really touched upon the areas where all chartered accountants would be very eager to understand the implications of, as far as the direct tax is concerned, the concept of SEP, the equalization levy, withholding tax obligations, on the indirect tax, all whether this is money, security, or how would it be treated, how would a sale of crypto be taken, what is NFT. So all these things, I think, would really add to the repository of knowledge that we are all in the process of collecting and would really help to build up practice into the new areas. Ninad Bhai, thank you so much. We have always depended on you to be our guide and, you know, holding us through this kind of discussions. So thank you everybody once again. And last thing where Suril says, I would like to add on. Suril, you said that cryptocurrency is here to stay, and I'm, you know, adding to that, that we know that Nishit Desai and Associate is here to stay with us, and we are going to take and, you know, leverage of every knowledge that we can take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Naushad. Thank you, Deepak Bhai.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.